Welcome to Brain Upgrade. What if I told you that one decision could completely change the way your brain responds to success, failure, stress, and uncertainty? Not by changing the world around you, but by changing the way your nervous system interprets it. Today, we're exploring a mindset that isn't about blind optimism. It's about rewiring your brain to recognize opportunity where most people only see obstacles. Because the life you experience is shaped not only by what happens to you, but by what your brain expects to happen next. Let's begin. Every thought you repeat leaves a biological footprint. Most people assume that their thoughts are simply reactions to the world around them, that they wake up, experience life, and their brain responds accordingly. But modern neuroscience suggests something much more interesting. Your brain is not just reacting to reality, it is constantly predicting it. Before you consciously notice what's happening around you, your nervous system is already generating expectations based on previous experiences, memories, habits, and the stories you've told yourself over and over again. Those expectations influence what you pay attention to, what you ignore, and ultimately how you behave. Think of your brain as a prediction machine. Every moment, it asks a simple question. Based on everything I've experienced before, what is most likely to happen next? It answers that question before you even become consciously aware of it. This process is incredibly efficient because it allows you to move through the world without analyzing every detail from scratch. But there's a hidden cost. If your predictions are consistently negative, your brain becomes exceptionally good at finding evidence that confirms those predictions. Imagine walking into an important meeting believing that people will judge you harshly. Long before anyone speaks, your nervous system has already shifted. Your breathing becomes shallower, your shoulders tense, your attention narrows towards signs of rejection. A neutral facial expression suddenly feels like criticism. A brief pause in conversation feels like disapproval. The external world hasn't changed, but your interpretation of it has. Your expectations become the lens through which reality is filtered. This isn't weakness or a lack of intelligence. It's a normal function of the brain. Neural circuits become stronger through repetition. Every time you think in a particular way, you increase the likelihood that your brain will choose that same pathway again in the future. This principle, often summarized as neurons that fire together, wire together, explains why repeated patterns of thinking eventually become automatic. Over time, your internal dialogue requires less conscious effort because your brain has learned it as the default response. Now consider what happens if you consistently tell yourself a different story. Not an unrealistic fantasy where nothing ever goes wrong, but a grounded expectation that every experience contains useful information. Instead of thinking this setback proves I'm not capable, you begin asking, what is this situation teaching me? Instead of assuming rejection means you're inadequate, you consider the possibility that it's redirecting your effort towards something better suited to your goals. That subtle shift changes the prediction your brain generates before the next challenge even begins. One of the remarkable characteristics of attention is that it is limited. Your brain processes an enormous amount of sensory information every second, but only a small fraction reaches conscious awareness. To manage this, it prioritizes information that appears relevant to your expectations and goals. If you've ever decided to buy a particular model of car and suddenly notice that same car everywhere, you experience this phenomenon. Those vehicles were always on the road, but your brain began treating them as important. The same process applies to opportunities, relationships, and personal growth. When you expect obstacles, your attention naturally gravitates toward obstacles. When you expect solutions, your brain becomes more efficient at detecting possibilities that were always present but previously ignored. This does not mean positive thinking changes reality by itself. Reality remains objective. Challenges remain real. Failure remains part of growth. What changes is your behavioral response. People who expect progress are more likely to take another step after disappointment. They ask better questions, explore more options, and remain engaged longer. Those behaviors dramatically increase the probability of success over time. Another important aspect is the relationship between expectation and stress. When the brain predicts danger, it activates physiological systems designed for survival. Heart rate increases, muscles prepare for action, stress hormones rise. These responses are adaptive in situations requiring immediate protection. But when every uncertainty is interpreted as a threat, the nervous system spends excessive time in a defensive state. Decision-making becomes narrower, creativity declines, and learning slows because the brain prioritizes survival over exploration. By contrast, approaching uncertainty with curiosity changes the quality of your physiological response. Instead of asking, "What if this goes wrong?" you begin asking, "What can I learn here?" That single question shifts attention away from fear and toward information. Curiosity doesn't eliminate stress, but it makes stress more manageable because your brain interprets the situation as something to engage with rather than escape from. This is why acting as if everything is working for you is not about pretending that every event is pleasant. It's about choosing an interpretation that keeps your nervous system open to learning, adaptation, and action. Difficult experiences can still be painful. Disappointment can still hurt, but they no longer become permanent evidence that you're incapable or destined to fail. Instead, they become data, information that helps refine your next decision. Over months and years, these repeated interpretations become part of your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone waiting for life to improve and begin behaving like someone who actively extracts value from every experience. That identity is not built through motivation alone. It is built through thousands of repeated thoughts that gradually reshape attention, behavior, and neural pathways. Eventually, your brain begins to expect growth instead of defeat. And when that expectation becomes your default, your actions naturally follow, creating results that once seemed impossible. Not because the world changed first, but because the way you engaged with it did. Every meaningful goal eventually brings you face to face with resistance. That resistance might appear as failure, uncertainty, criticism, rejection, or unexpected setbacks. Most people interpret these moments as signs that they're moving in the wrong direction. But from the perspective of the nervous system, obstacles are not instructions to stop. They are sources of information. The way your brain interprets these moments determines whether you adapt and improve or withdraw and repeat the same patterns. One of the brain's primary functions is to detect prediction errors. Every time reality differs from what you expected, your brain pays close attention. These moments are incredibly valuable because they signal an opportunity to update your internal model of the world. If everything always happened exactly as predicted, there would be very little learning. Growth occurs when the brain encounters something unexpected and begins asking, what needs to change so I can respond more effectively next time? This is why failure, while uncomfortable, is one of the most powerful teachers available to the human nervous system. The discomfort you feel after making a mistake isn't there to punish you, it's there to capture your attention. It encourages reflection, adjustment, and improved performance. The problem is that many people interpret that discomfort as evidence of personal inadequacy rather than useful feedback. They move from saying, that strategy didn't work, to saying, I don't have what it takes. Those are two completely different conclusions, and they lead to very different futures. Consider someone learning a new skill, whether it's public speaking, starting a business, or developing physical strength. Early attempts are almost always imperfect. Mistakes are inevitable because the brain is building new neural pathways through experience. If every mistake is viewed as proof of failure, motivation declines rapidly. But if each mistake is treated as information about what to adjust, the learning process accelerates. The external event remains the same. The interpretation changes everything. Your physiological response also depends on interpretation. When your brain labels a challenge as overwhelming or threatening, your body shifts into a defensive state. Breathing becomes shorter and faster, muscles tighten, attention narrows toward potential danger. This response can be useful in emergencies, but it often limits your ability to think creatively, solve problems, and make balanced decisions during everyday challenges. Now imagine approaching that same challenge with a different perspective. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? You ask, what is the situation trying to teach me? That subtle shift activates curiosity rather than helplessness. Curiosity broadens attention. It encourages exploration instead of avoidance. Rather than spending your mental energy defending your self-image, you begin investing that energy in understanding the problem itself. This distinction is especially important because the brain tends to remember emotionally significant experiences. If every obstacle becomes emotionally associated with fear, shame, or defeat, your nervous system gradually becomes more sensitive to future challenges. You begin anticipating failure before taking action. Over time, this anticipation can become self-limiting, not because success is impossible, but because the expectation of failure reduces the willingness to engage. Successful individuals often appear resilient, but resilience is not the absence of difficulty. It's the repeated habit of extracting information from difficulty. They don't ignore setbacks or pretend they aren't painful. Instead, they shorten the time between disappointment and analysis. They recover more quickly because they focus less on assigning blame and more on identifying useful feedback. This approach also changes how you perceive other people's opinions. Criticism can either become a threat to your identity or a source of valuable data. Not every criticism is accurate, and not every opinion deserves equal weight. But dismissing all feedback prevents growth, while accepting every opinion damages confidence. The key is learning to evaluate feedback objectively. Ask whether it contains information that can improve your performance. If it does, use it. If it doesn't, let it pass without allowing it to define you. Obstacles also reveal strengths that comfort never exposes. Many capacities, patience, discipline, emotional regulation, adaptability, cannot develop in the absence of challenge. Just as muscles require resistance to become stronger, the brain strengthens through solving progressively difficult problems. Without resistance, there is no reason for the nervous system to adapt. An important principle to remember is that progress is rarely linear. The brain learns through cycles of improvement, temporary setbacks, consolidation, and renewed growth. There are periods when it feels like nothing is changing, even though important neural adaptations are occurring beneath conscious awareness. This is why persistence matters. If you abandon the process during moments of apparent stagnation, you interrupt the very adaptations that would have led to improvement. When you begin acting as though every obstacle contains useful information, you fundamentally change your relationship with uncertainty. Instead of fearing the unknown, you become interested in it. Instead of seeing setbacks as barriers, you begin viewing them as adjustments to your path. This mindset doesn't eliminate disappointment, but it prevents disappointment from becoming your identity. Over time, your brain starts expecting learning instead of failure. Challenges become less intimidating because they are no longer interpreted as verdicts on your potential. They become part of a continuous feedback system that helps refine your skills, sharpen your judgment, and strengthen your ability to navigate complexity. The obstacle itself may not change, but the person encountering it certainly does. And often that transformation becomes the very reason success was possible in the first place. One of the most common misconceptions about confidence is that it must come before action. People often believe they need to feel ready, motivated, or certain before they take the first step. But if you look closely at how the brain actually develops confidence, you'll find that the process works in the opposite direction. Confidence is rarely the starting point. More often, it is the result of repeated action. The nervous system builds trust in your abilities by collecting evidence through experience, not by waiting for the perfect emotional state. Your brain is constantly evaluating one simple question: can I handle this? It doesn't answer that question based on your hopes or intentions. It answers it based on memories of previous behavior. Every time you follow through on a difficult task, keep a promise to yourself, or recover from a setback, your brain records that experience. Over time, those repeated experiences become evidence that you are capable of handling future challenges. This is why confidence feels stable in people who consistently take action. It is grounded in accumulated proof rather than temporary emotion. Think about learning to ride a bicycle. No amount of reading or positive thinking can replace the experience of balancing, falling, adjusting, and trying again. The brain refines movement through repeated feedback. At first, every correction requires conscious effort. Eventually, those same movements become automatic because the neural circuits responsible for balance and coordination have been strengthened through repetition. The same principle applies to almost every area of life. Whether you're learning to speak in front of an audience, building a business, improving relationships, or developing emotional resilience, the brain learns by doing. One reason people hesitate to act is that they overestimate the importance of feeling motivated. Motivation is useful, but it is inherently inconsistent. It rises and falls depending on sleep, stress, environment, energy levels, and countless other biological factors. If you only take action when motivation is high, your progress becomes unpredictable. Discipline, on the other hand, reduces your dependence on emotional states. It allows behavior to remain consistent even when motivation disappears. From a neuroscience perspective, repeated action strengthens neural pathways associated with that behavior. Every repetition makes the brain more efficient. Tasks that once required significant mental effort begin demanding less cognitive energy. This process is one of the defining characteristics of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself in response to repeated experience. What initially feels difficult gradually becomes familiar because the nervous system adapts to repeated demands. This is one reason why small actions matter far more than they appear to. Many people postpone action because they believe the first step must be dramatic. In reality, the brain responds exceptionally well to consistency. A small action performed every day creates repeated activation of the same neural circuits. Over weeks and months, those circuits become increasingly efficient. The behavior becomes easier not because the task changed, but because your brain changed. There's another important psychological effect that follows action. Every completed task reduces uncertainty. Uncertainty is one of the primary drivers of anxiety because the brain naturally seeks predictability. When you avoid difficult situations, uncertainty grows. Your imagination begins filling in gaps with worst-case scenarios. The challenge becomes larger in your mind than it actually is. But when you take action, even imperfectly, uncertainty begins to shrink. Reality replaces imagination, giving your brain accurate information instead of fearful speculation. Consider someone who avoids difficult conversations because they fear conflict. Each time they avoid the conversation, the brain interprets avoidance as evidence that the situation was dangerous. That reinforces future avoidance. But if they choose to have the conversation respectfully and discover that they can manage the discomfort, the brain updates its prediction. The next conversation becomes slightly less intimidating because it now has evidence that survival and progress are possible. Action also changes your identity. Most people think identity determines behavior, but behavior also shapes identity. Every repeated action sends your brain a message about the kind of person you are becoming. If you consistently exercise, your brain begins identifying you as someone who values health. If you consistently read, you begin seeing yourself as someone committed to learning. If you consistently show up despite fear, your brain gradually adopts the identity of someone who is resilient. This identity shift is powerful because people naturally behave in ways that align with how they see themselves. Once disciplined behavior becomes part of your self-concept, maintaining that behavior requires less internal conflict. You're no longer forcing yourself to act. You're simply acting in accordance with who you believe you are. An important distinction must be made here. Taking action does not guarantee immediate success. There will still be failures, mistakes, and unexpected outcomes. But every attempt provides valuable information that improves future performance. Even unsuccessful efforts strengthen emotional resilience because they teach the brain that discomfort is survivable. That lesson alone reduces fear and increases willingness to engage with future challenges. When you adopt the mindset that everything is working for you, action becomes easier because you stop demanding certainty before you begin. You recognize that every experience, successful or unsuccessful, adds to the evidence your brain uses to build competence. Instead of waiting for confidence to appear, you create it through behavior. Over time, something remarkable happens. The tasks that once seemed intimidating become familiar. The situations that once triggered hesitation become opportunities for growth. Not because fear disappears completely, but because your brain now possesses a history of overcoming difficulty. Confidence is no longer based on hope or positive thinking. It is based on repeated demonstrations that you can learn, adapt, recover, and continue moving forward. And that kind of confidence is far more durable than any fleeting feeling because it has been built through action, reinforced by experience, and permanently woven into the way your nervous system understands what you are capable of. The most powerful transformation a person can experience is not a change in circumstances, but a change in identity. Goals can motivate you for a period of time, habits can improve your daily routine, and knowledge can expand your understanding of the world. But lasting behavioral change happens when your brain begins to recognize a different version of who you are. Instead of chasing success as something outside yourself, you start behaving like someone for whom growth, learning, and resilience are simply part of everyday life. Your brain is remarkably efficient at preserving consistency. Once it forms an identity, it naturally encourages behaviors that align with that identity. If someone believes, "I'm not disciplined," the brain tends to notice every missed workout, every unfinished project, and every moment of procrastination as confirmation of that belief. On the other hand, if someone begins to see themselves as a person who follows through on commitments, even small acts of consistency become reinforcing evidence. The external behavior may look similar at first, but internally, the brain is constructing a completely different narrative. This is why the phrase, "act as if everything always works for you," is ultimately about identity rather than optimism. It doesn't mean believing that life will always be easy, or that every outcome will be positive. It means choosing to become the kind of person who believes every experience has value. Whether the outcome is success or failure, approval or rejection, progress or delay, your first instinct becomes learning instead of complaining. Over time, that response becomes automatic because your nervous system has practiced it repeatedly. One of the remarkable features of the human brain is its ability to adapt through repeated experiences. Every decision you make strengthens certain neural pathways while allowing others to weaken. This process doesn't happen overnight, but it happens continuously. Each time you respond to difficulty with curiosity instead of defeat, you reinforce circuits associated with emotional regulation, problem solving, and cognitive flexibility. These adaptations accumulate gradually until your default response to stress begins to change. Many people spend years trying to eliminate discomfort from their lives, believing that peace comes from avoiding challenges. But the nervous system wasn't designed to grow through comfort alone. It develops by successfully navigating manageable levels of stress, recovering, and adapting. Just as muscles become stronger after recovering from resistance, the brain becomes more capable after overcoming meaningful challenges. This is why resilience cannot be purchased, borrowed, or inherited. It must be built through experience. Identity is also shaped by the questions you ask yourself. Imagine facing an unexpected setback. One person immediately asks, "Why does this always happen to me?" Another asks, "What skill do I need to develop because of this?" Those questions direct attention toward completely different information. The first encourages helplessness because it searches for evidence that life is unfair. The second activates the brain's problem-solving networks because it assumes growth is possible. Over months and years, those repeated questions shape entirely different lives. An important principle in behavioral science is that your environment influences your identity more than most people realize. The people you spend time with, the information you consume, the routines you repeat, and the standards you accept all send signals to your brain about what is normal. If your environment constantly reinforces negativity, distraction, and low expectations, maintaining a growth-oriented identity becomes much more difficult. Conversely, surrounding yourself with disciplined individuals, meaningful work, and healthy routines increases the likelihood that your brain will adopt those behaviors as part of your identity. This doesn't require perfection. In fact, perfection is often the enemy of lasting change. The brain doesn't need flawless performance to strengthen new patterns. It needs repetition. Missing a day, making a mistake, or encountering a setback does not erase progress. What matters is returning to the behavior consistently enough that the desired identity continues to receive evidence. A single action rarely changes who you are. Hundreds of repeated actions eventually do. There is also tremendous value in separating your identity from your immediate outcomes. Success and failure are events. They are not permanent descriptions of a person. If every success becomes proof that you're valuable, and every failure becomes proof that you're inadequate, your emotional stability becomes dependent on circumstances you cannot fully control. But when your identity is rooted in qualities like persistence, discipline, curiosity, and integrity, external results become feedback rather than definitions. You remain committed to the process regardless of temporary outcomes. As this perspective becomes more deeply embedded, your relationship with uncertainty begins to shift. Instead of fearing situations where you don't have all the answers, you become willing to enter them because you trust your ability to learn. Confidence no longer depends on certainty, it depends on adaptability. You recognize that whatever happens, your brain is capable of analyzing the experience, extracting useful information, and improving for the future. Eventually, this becomes the foundation of an entirely different way of living. You stop asking whether life is being fair. You stop waiting for perfect conditions before acting. You stop measuring your worth by every individual success or setback. Instead, you focus on becoming someone who consistently grows stronger through experience. Challenges become opportunities to refine your character. Delays become opportunities to strengthen patience. Mistakes become opportunities to improve your judgment. When you repeatedly behave from this identity, your nervous system begins expecting progress instead of defeat. Not because every outcome is favorable, but because every outcome contributes to your development. You become less reactive, more deliberate, and increasingly resilient. Your attention naturally shifts towards solutions. Your actions become more consistent, and your confidence becomes rooted in evidence rather than emotion. In the end, acting as though everything works for you is not about convincing yourself that life will unfold exactly as planned. It is about becoming the kind of person who can transform every experience into fuel for growth. That identity changes how you think, how you respond, how you recover, and ultimately how you live. And once that identity is firmly established, success is no longer something you occasionally achieve. It becomes the natural byproduct of the person you have chosen to become. Remember this: life doesn't always give you what you want, but it always gives you something you can use. The people who grow the most aren't the ones who avoid challenges. They're the ones who train their minds to find meaning, learn from every experience, and keep moving forward. So from today, don't wait for life to work in your favor. Become the person who can make every situation work in your favor.
That's how lasting confidence is built.
That's how resilience is earned. And that's how extraordinary lives are created. Thanks for watching. If you found this valuable, subscribe to Brain Upgrade, and I'll see you in the next video.